The morning light drifted quietly into Evelyn Carter's kitchen, settling across the worn oak table where she sat with her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Outside, Asheville was just beginning to wake. Soft birdsong through the open window, a stray breeze carrying the scent of early autumn. It was one of those small, peaceful moments Evelyn cherished, the kind that made her feel grounded even when life felt unpredictable. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest, grateful for the stillness. Her life with Thomas had rarely been this gentle. 7 years of marriage had shaped them into something functional, steady, familiar, but never quite effortless. They had drifted in and out of closeness, sometimes moving in harmony, other times orbiting each other like strangers in the same house. Still, Evelyn believed they were stable enough. She had long stopped expecting perfection. Peace was enough. Predictability was enough. Or so she told herself. The refrigerator hummed softly behind her. The sunlight slid a little higher on the wall. Nothing hinted at the storm about to split her morning in half. Then the phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the quiet like a blade. Evelyn blinked, startled, setting her tea down more abruptly than she intended. Calls this early were never good news. She reached for the phone, clearing her throat as she answered. "Mrs. Carter?" a man's voice said, official, tense. "Yes, this is she. This is Trooper Reynolds with the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. I'm calling regarding your husband, Thomas Carter." Her breath caught. The room seemed to narrow, the air thinning around her. She gripped the counter for balance. "There was an accident early this morning," the trooper continued, his tone gentle but firm, the way someone might approach a cliff edge. "I'm very sorry. Your husband was pronounced dead at the scene." For a moment, Evelyn didn't understand the words. They floated in the air, detached, like they were meant for someone else. Then they slammed into her all at once, knocking the breath out of her chest. Her knees buckled, and she lowered herself into a chair before her legs gave out completely. No, that can't. There must be a mistake," she whispered, her voice cracking. He just left for work yesterday. He said." "I understand," the trooper said quietly. "I truly am sorry." Her pulse hammered in her ears. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt tight, closing around every breath. But the trooper wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to know." Evelyn felt the room tilt, the steady kitchen suddenly unfamiliar and wrong. "He wasn't alone in the vehicle," the trooper said. "A passenger also died in the crash. Her name was Laura Mitchell." The name meant nothing to Evelyn, at least not immediately. It hung there, foreign and hollow, until the silence between them made her skin prickle. The trooper hesitated before adding quietly, "She was his long-term partner." A cold rush moved through Evelyn, leaving her rigid, breathless. Partner, mistress. The meaning struck before the word fully formed. Her chest tightened with a pain so sharp she instinctively pressed a hand against it, but the final blow was still coming. "One more thing, Mrs. Carter," the trooper said, his voice heavy now. "Miss Mitchell had 2 young daughters, twin girls. They're 3 years old." The world inside Evelyn's mind shattered. Her thoughts scattered like broken glass, sharp and senseless. She stared at the tiled floor as if it might tell her this wasn't real, that she had misunderstood every word. Twin daughters. His daughters. Her teacup slipped from her hand and hit the floor, shattering. She didn't flinch. She didn't even hear it fully. Hours passed. She didn't know how many, while she sat motionless in the kitchen chair, eyes unfocused, palms trembling. The sun shifted across the room, warming her shoulder, but she felt nothing. Her mind was a wide, echoing space, filled with a single truth she could neither escape nor comprehend. Thomas was dead, and the life she thought she knew had died with him. The days that followed felt unreal, as if Evelyn were moving through someone else's life. She managed the arrangements for Thomas's funeral the way people sign their names on documents they haven't read, automatically, without understanding. She answered calls, met with the funeral director, selected a service time, approved decisions she barely heard. Faces blurred together, voices muffled into background noise. Everything smelled faintly of lilies and cold air. Grief pressed against her. But it wasn't the clean kind born from love and loss. It was tangled with disbelief, humiliation, and a betrayal so sharp it stole her breath each time she remembered that Thomas had been living a life she had never seen. Every reminder cut anew, every condolence, every memory someone mentioned, every person who said, "He loved you so much," without knowing anything at all. Still, on the morning of the funeral, she stood among the mourners as if she were carved out of something solid. She needed to get through this, at least. When she first saw them, two tiny girls standing near a social worker, Evelyn's heart lurched. Grace and Hannah, the twins. Grace clung to Hannah's hand so tightly their knuckles whitened. Both wore simple dresses too formal for their small frames, their hair brushed neatly, their eyes impossibly large and terrified. They watched the adults with a kind of silent panic, like animals unsure where shelter might be found. They were only 3 years old. They didn't understand death or betrayal or the complicated lines adults drew between love and wrongdoing. They only knew their parents were gone. Evelyn couldn't look away. The CPS worker, a calm-eyed woman named Ms. Collins, approached her quietly after the service. "I wanted to speak with you," she said gently, as if approaching someone who might break. "Grace and Hannah have no living relatives on their mother's side. Their case is complicated, but as Thomas's legal spouse, you are eligible for kinship placement." Evelyn blinked, as if the words had taken a moment to reach her. "Kinship placement? With me?" "Yes," Ms. Collins confirmed. "It's the strongest option for stability. We'll support whatever decision you make." Stability. The word felt heavy. What stability did she have left to offer anyone? Her marriage was a lie. Her finances were fragile. Her heart was in pieces she didn't know how to gather. But when she glanced again at the twins, Grace staring at the floor, Hannah trying not to cry, something inside Evelyn shifted. They were alone in a way she understood too well. Later, when she told her family and friends what she was considering, the objections came fast. "Evelyn, you can't take on 2 toddlers alone. You're grieving. This isn't the time to make big decisions. They're not even related to you. You owe Thomas nothing." Maybe they were right. Maybe every warning was reasonable. But when Evelyn thought of the girls returning to a temporary foster home with strangers, grieving for parents they barely understood, she felt her resolve settle like a stone. "They're innocent," she said quietly. "None of this is their fault." That night she lay awake long after the house had gone dark, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She replayed the image of the twins at the funeral, small hands gripping each other, eyes lost, seeking anywhere that felt safe. Before the sun rose the next morning, she called Miss Collins. "If the offer still stands," Evelyn said, voice firm despite the tremor beneath it, "I'll take them." She didn't know how she would manage. She only knew she couldn't let them suffer for the choices their father made, and that was enough. Grace and Hannah moved into Evelyn's house on a cool Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when the sky looked pale and tired. A CPS car pulled up quietly to the curb, and the social worker helped the girls out, each holding a small backpack that seemed far too light for a life that had just been uprooted. Evelyn stood on the porch, hands clasped together, unsure how to look welcoming without overwhelming them. Grace stepped forward first, wide-eyed and curious, taking in the house, the porch swing, even the wind chimes swaying gently by the door. Hannah stayed close behind her, almost hidden, her small fingers twisting the edge of her shirt. She didn't look up, just stared at the steps as if they might collapse under her. Inside, the house felt different instantly. The sound of small shoes on the hardwood floors, the cautious, uneven breaths of children unsure where to stand. Everything changed the rhythm Evelyn had known for years. She knelt to their height. "This is your home now," she said softly. "You're safe here. You can ask me anything you want." Grace nodded, then immediately asked where the bathroom was. Hannah said nothing. Over the next few days, their personalities became painfully clear. Grace followed Evelyn around the house, curious about everything: what she was cooking, where certain things belonged, why the mailman came twice a day that week. She asked questions in soft, polite bursts, her voice a tether searching for certainty. Hannah, on the other hand, drifted like a quiet shadow. She stayed near doorways, avoiding eye contact, clutching a small stuffed bear CPS had given her. If Evelyn spoke directly to her, she answered with a nod or a whisper so faint it barely reached the air. Evelyn did her best not to let them sense how unsteady she felt inside. Grief still clung to her, sharp around the edges, unpredictable. Some mornings she woke up with a weight in her chest so heavy she could barely stand. Betrayal crept into her thoughts when the house grew quiet, reminding her that Thomas had built an entire life she never saw. But the girls didn't need to inherit that pain, so Evelyn smiled when they looked at her, crouched to their level, and kept her voice warm even on the days her heart felt like it was splintering. Money grew tight quickly. Evelyn had never budgeted for 2 children, 2 sets of clothes, 2 plates at the table, 2 little bodies that needed warmth and comfort. She picked up extra shifts where she could, cleaning offices in the evenings, tutoring a neighbor's child on weekends, helping prep food at a small cafe downtown on nights they needed an extra hand. She came home tired, hands aching, but she never let the girls see her collapse into bed. They needed stability, not the sight of a woman held together by willpower alone. Despite the busier schedule, the house felt quieter than ever. Grace's chatter filled some of the silence. But not all. Hannah barely spoke, and her presence, gentle, hesitant, felt like a whisper in the corners of every room. Yet somehow, the space also felt fuller. 2 small jackets hanging beside Evelyn's, 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, 2 tiny pairs of socks that always seemed to disappear into the laundry. They changed everything. The house wasn't just different now, it was beginning to shift, rearranging itself around 3 people who had no choice but to learn how to breathe in the same uncertain space. The weeks that followed moved in a fragile, tentative rhythm. Nothing changed all at once, not in the dramatic way people expected when they imagined families forming. Instead, everything shifted in small, almost imperceptible pieces, like light slowly stretching across a room as the sun rises. The girls began to warm to Evelyn, not in leaps, but in careful steps that matched the shape of their grief. Grace was the first to edge closer. She followed Evelyn from room to room with an earnestness that felt both sweet and heartbreaking. If Evelyn folded laundry, Grace sat on the floor nearby sorting socks or simply watching. If Evelyn cooked, Grace hovered near the counter, inhaling the scent of whatever was on the stove, occasionally asking soft questions about ingredients or recipes. She trailed her like a small orbiting moon, drawn in by the steady warmth Evelyn did her best to maintain. Hannah's affection blossomed differently, quietly, almost shyly. She rarely sought attention, but she left proof of her trust in little places. A tiny drawing of a cat on the kitchen table, a folded note with a smiley face tucked under Evelyn's coffee mug, a crayon picture of the 3 of them left on her pillow. She rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, but her small gestures carried a tenderness that made Evelyn ache. Slowly, the girls began to see her, not as the woman tied to their father's past, but as something steadier, someone who woke them gently each morning, packed their lunches, knelt to tie their shoes, and kissed the tops of their heads before school. Someone who dried their tears without asking for anything in return. Someone who made the frightening world feel a little less sharp. Evelyn became their anchor, the quiet center they leaned toward as they tried to rebuild after losing everything familiar. Friends admired her endlessly. They told her she was brave, selfless, unbelievably strong. They praised her patience and compassion, marveling at how she'd stepped into motherhood so unexpectedly and so wholeheartedly. But none of them saw the nights she sat at the edge of her bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears slipping down her face as doubts pressed in from all sides. Was she enough for them? Was she doing this right? Could she give them more than just roof and routine? Could she give them a home? Some nights she found herself whispering apologies into the darkness, wishing she could shield the girls from the pain she herself didn't know how to process. Other nights she simply cried, exhausted by the weight of responsibility and the fear of failing the only two people who needed her so desperately. But the daytime, when the girls were awake, when small hands tugged at her sleeve and soft voices called her name, gave her something steadier to stand on. One afternoon, as she helped Grace with a puzzle on the living room rug, the little girl looked up suddenly, eyes bright with a simple, instinctive affection. "Mom, can you help me find the corner piece?" The word landed softly, but inside Evelyn, something broke open. She didn't correct Grace. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe for a moment. Warmth rose behind her eyes, blurring the edges of the puzzle and the room around them. Her throat tightened with a mix of grief and gratitude so overwhelming she couldn't speak. Grace didn't seem to notice the change. She just smiled and kept searching through the pieces. But for Evelyn, the world shifted. She hadn't expected the title. She certainly hadn't earned it in her own mind. But hearing it from a child who had lost everything, felt like the beginning of something real. Something like family. Time moved forward with a quiet steadiness, carrying Grace and Hannah from the uncertainty of their first months with Evelyn into the rhythm of childhood. Before she realized it, they were standing in front of her in tiny backpacks and new shoes, ready for their first day of elementary school. They held hands the way they always did, Grace eager, Hannah cautious, but both looking to Evelyn for reassurance. She knelt, straightened a collar here, smoothed a braid there, and kissed the tops of their heads before watching them disappear into the bright hallway of the school. The house felt strangely empty that morning, but Evelyn didn't have time to sit in the quiet. Life had only grown busier. She had pieced together a schedule made of overlapping jobs, office cleaning in the early mornings, tutoring neighborhood children in the afternoons, and taking kitchen shifts at a small cafe downtown whenever they needed extra hands. She learned to live on 4 hours of sleep and endless cups of coffee. Her hands grew rough from scrubbing and lifting, and her back ached more often than not, but she pushed through every day with a determined softness the girls never fully saw. Her sacrifices piled up like folded laundry she never had time to put away. She stopped buying books she once devoured. She stopped taking morning walks on the Blue Ridge trails she loved. Her weekends vanished into overtime and errands. She told herself these were small prices to pay. She didn't need hobbies when the girls needed school supplies. She didn't need rest when the girls needed stability. She didn't need her own dreams when theirs were still forming. But every now and then, late at night, when the house was finally still, she let herself imagine the dream she'd once held so close she could feel its shape in her hands, a small cafe of her own. She pictured warm lighting, shelves lined with handmade mugs, the scent of freshly baked pies drifting through the air. She imagined neighbors coming in for comfort food after long days, imagined her own recipes finally having a home. But the fantasy dimmed each time reality settled back in. She simply didn't have the money, the time, or the freedom to take a risk like that. The dream became something she stored carefully on a high shelf, too precious to throw away, too unrealistic to take down. Eventually, she stopped thinking about it at all, yet even as her own aspirations slipped further out of reach, her joy in raising the girls grew stronger. Grace developed an early love for numbers, counting everything from cereal pieces to the tiles on the kitchen floor. Hannah flourished in art, filling the house with sketches, crafts, and little popsicle stick sculptures. The walls slowly brightened with their creations, softening the space that once felt so hollow. They grew into kind, thoughtful children, Grace attentive and optimistic, Hannah imaginative and gentle. They held on to Evelyn as their constant, their foundation, the person they trusted to explain the world and make it safe. She made their birthday cakes from scratch, helped with science fair projects, sat in auditorium seats at school performances, always in the front row, always cheering the loudest. Some nights, as she watched them sleep, their breaths soft and even, Evelyn felt a swelling warmth that reminded her why every sacrifice mattered. Her dream had drifted far away, but in its place, 2 others had taken root, growing stronger every day, and she wouldn't have traded that for anything. By the time Grace and Hannah reached their teenage years, the house felt fuller, louder, and somehow more complicated. Their laughter echoed down the hallway after school, their music drifted beneath their bedroom doors, and sketches, textbooks, and half-finished projects adorned every surface. They had grown into bright, capable young women, each distinct in her own way. Grace, logical and determined, Hannah, dreamy and artistic. But as they matured, so did their curiosity about the past. Their memories of Thomas were foggy at best, fragmented impressions of a tall man, a voice they couldn't place, a scent they couldn't name. Sometimes one of them remembered a flash of being lifted into the air, or a deep laugh, but nothing more. They knew he had died when they were very young, but they didn't understand who he had been, and they certainly didn't know about the life he lived outside of the one Evelyn had shared with him. The questions began subtly at first. Grace would linger a little longer when they passed old photographs that Evelyn kept in a small wooden box. Hannah sometimes stared at the framed picture of the Blue Ridge Mountains above the mantel, the one Thomas had insisted on hanging, as if trying to decode something she couldn't quite articulate. The silence between them stretched heavier with each passing week. One evening after dinner, Grace finally found the courage to say what had been hovering unspoken for years. Evelyn was rinsing dishes when she heard her name, not Mom, but Evelyn, spoken with a seriousness she wasn't used to from her daughter. She turned to see Grace standing in the doorway, her expression earnest and a little hesitant. "Can we talk?" Grace asked. Hannah hovered a step behind her, eyes downcast but clearly listening. Evelyn dried her hands, sensing what was coming but unprepared all the same. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Grace inhaled, steadying herself. "What was our dad like?" The question wasn't unexpected, but it landed in Evelyn's chest like a weight she had spent years trying not to carry. She gestured for them to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd received the call about the accident, the same table where so much of their new life had begun. They sat across from her, 2 young women searching for answers, searching for pieces of themselves. Evelyn folded her hands to keep them from trembling. "Your father..." She paused, choosing her words with care. "He was... complicated." Grace and Hannah exchanged a glance. Evelyn continued, "You were very little when he died. You don't remember, and that's no fault of yours, but you should know the truth. All of it." She breathed in deeply, grounding herself. "Thomas loved you," she said gently, "in the ways he knew how, but he was also living a life I didn't know about. He had another relationship, a long-term one, with your mother, Laura." Hannah's head lifted at the name she barely remembered. Grace's expression tightened. "He kept it a secret from me," Evelyn said quietly. "I didn't know anything until the accident. Not about the affair, not about the 2 of you. When they called me that morning, that was the first time I learned the truth." Silence seeped into the room, thick and unmoving. The girls processed the revelation in different ways. Grace leaned back, eyes unfocused, her mind piecing together the fragments of a father she could never fully understand. Hannah's brows knitted together, hurt and confusion flickering across her face as if she were trying to reconcile the man she barely remembered with the man Evelyn was describing. Evelyn didn't rush them. She didn't try to fill the silence. She simply sat there, steady and open, offering them the truth that had once shattered her world. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft. "I know this is a lot, and it's okay to feel however you feel." Neither girl answered. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the same hum that had filled the room the morning everything changed. The truth lay between them now, raw and undeniable, and nothing about their lives would feel quite the same. The days that followed the conversation hung heavy over the house, as if the air itself had thickened with everything the girls were trying to understand. The revelation about their father didn't explode into arguments or dramatic scenes. It settled in quietly, slowly, steadily, like fog rolling in and refusing to lift. The warmth that usually flowed so naturally between the three of them now felt strained, stretched thin by questions none of them knew how to answer. Grace tried to make sense of the truth first. She had always been the analytical one, the problem solver. The girl who believed that if she could gather enough information, she could understand anything. But this was different. This wasn't math homework or a school project. This was identity. Hers, Hannah's, and the complicated legacy of a man she barely remembered. At night, she stayed awake later than usual, sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up, scrolling through articles on grief and family secrets, searching for something that mirrored her own experience. Some days she looked at Evelyn with questions she couldn't articulate, as if trying to compare the mother who raised her with the ghost of a father she suddenly felt she needed to know. Other days, she said nothing at all. Hannah responded in the opposite way. She slipped inward, withdrawing in a way that reminded Evelyn of the early days, the quiet girl who painted her feelings instead of speaking them. Except now, her drawings changed. Her once colorful sketches faded into muted shades, gray mountains, lone trees, empty rooms. She avoided eye contact, answered questions with nods or shrugs, and often disappeared into her room for hours. Evelyn noticed every detail, every shift in tone, every silence that stretched longer than it used to. She wanted desperately to reach for them, to soothe them the way she had when they were small. But they weren't children anymore. This was a different kind of wound, one she couldn't bandage with a hug or a bedtime story. So she gave them space. She cooked their favorite meals even when no one ate much. She left the hallway light on for Hannah at night. She told Grace she was available to talk any time, even if Grace didn't take her up on it. She kept moving through the routines of their life with quiet patience, trying not to crowd them, trying not to disappear either. Meals grew quieter. Laughter became rare, replaced with long stretches of silence broken only by the clink of silverware or the sound of forks scraped across plates. The house, once so full of their energy, felt subdued, as if it were holding its breath. Some evenings, Evelyn stood in the doorway of the girls' shared bathroom, watching the steam from their showers drift into the hallway, thinking about how much they had survived once already, how they'd rebuilt their sense of safety with her, how fragile that safety now seemed. She felt the distance like a physical ache, sharp and unrelenting. But she refused to force closeness or rush their healing. She remembered too well what it felt like to have your world collapse without warning. She knew that everyone moved through grief differently, and this truth about who they were and where they came from was its own kind of loss. So she waited. She checked on them gently. She made sure they never felt abandoned. And each night, before turning off the lights, she whispered a quiet promise to the empty kitchen. "We'll get through this, even if it's slow, even if it's hard." The girls didn't hear her, but she said it anyway, because even in the silence, she hadn't stopped loving them, not for a moment. It took nearly a week for the heaviness in the house to shift, even slightly. The silence had settled so deeply into their routines that Evelyn began to wonder if this was simply how things would be now. Slow, quiet, strained. She tried not to take it personally, reminding herself over and over that pain always echoed differently for each person. Still, every quiet dinner, every closed bedroom door, every unfinished sentence carved another small ache into her chest. Then, one evening, as she stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup, she heard soft footsteps behind her. "Mom?" Grace's voice was tentative, almost fragile. Evelyn turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a towel. Grace stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, her expression uncertain but determined. Evelyn felt her breath catch. It was the first time in days Grace had addressed her with warmth. "Of course," Evelyn said gently. "Come sit." Grace hesitated before moving toward the table. She sat down slowly, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if she needed something solid to hold on to. "I've been thinking a lot," Grace began, her voice wavering, "about everything you told us, about Dad, about who we are." Evelyn nodded, giving her the space to continue. "I don't know how to feel," Grace admitted. "It's like trying to remember someone who was never really there. And now that I know the truth, it's even more confusing." She swallowed, eyes glistening. "Part of me is angry, part of me is sad, and part of me feels guilty for not feeling more." Evelyn's heart ached at the honesty in her tone. She pulled out a chair and sat beside her, careful not to overwhelm her. "Everything you're feeling is okay," she said softly. "There's no right or wrong way to process this." Grace nodded, wiping at her eyes. "But the one thing I keep coming back to," she whispered, "is you." Evelyn blinked, taken aback. "You were there for us every single day," Grace continued, her voice strengthening. "When we were scared, when we were confused, when we didn't understand what we'd lost, you gave us everything. You taught us everything. You—" Her breath hitched as she looked directly at Evelyn. "You're the one who stayed. You're the one who loved us. And I want you to know that I see that. I see all of it." Evelyn reached out, her own eyes blurring, and rested a trembling hand on Grace's. "You're my daughter," she whispered, "in every way that matters." Grace let out a soft, broken sound and leaned into her, wrapping her arms tightly around Evelyn's shoulders. Evelyn held her just as fiercely, relief flooding through her in warm, overwhelming waves. Neither of them noticed Hannah standing in the hallway until she stepped closer, eyes wide and wet. "Is it okay if she whispered. Before Evelyn could finish nodding, Hannah moved toward them, sliding into the embrace with a quiet urgency. She clung to Evelyn's side, her voice small but steady. "We love you, Mom." Evelyn's breath caught. She gathered both girls into her arms, holding them as if she could fold all their pain into her chest and shield them from it forever. The three of them stayed that way, pressed together, crying softly, hearts finally aligned again, until the pot on the stove simmered down and the room filled with the steady warmth of something mending. That night, a new peace settled over their home. The kind that grows only after truth has been spoken and love has chosen to stay. The years carried Grace and Hannah smoothly into adulthood, each step marked by milestones Evelyn had once only dared to hope they would reach. College applications, first jobs, first heartbreaks, small victories, and hard lessons. Evelyn witnessed all of it with a quiet pride, watching from a respectful distance as the girls she had raised learned how to stand wholly on their own. By their early 20s, they had become women with confident strides and lives taking shape in ways she could only admire. Grace, ever the logical one, had graduated with honors in finance and secured a position at a respected accounting firm in downtown Asheville. She thrived in the structured environment, her mind sharp and steady as she navigated balance sheets and client meetings. Her colleagues appreciated her reliability. Clients trusted her. She carried herself with the same grounded energy she'd had as a child, the kind that made people feel safe in her presence. Hannah, true to her artistic heart, found her place in interior design. She landed an entry-level role at a boutique design studio where she astonished her supervisors with her eye for color and intuitive sense of space. Her sketches, once taped along the walls of Evelyn's kitchen, were now turning into real projects. Warm living rooms, soft-lighted cafes, cozy office nooks. She poured pieces of herself into every design, and the world responded with admiration. Evelyn watched them grow with a gratitude she could never fully express. They were kind. They were capable. They were everything she had hoped they could become. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm now. The girls visited often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes to help fix something around the house, sometimes just to sit and laugh about old memories. Evelyn had grown accustomed to the steady hum of independence around them. She was proud, even if a small, quiet part of her missed the sound of their footsteps in the hallway each morning. One evening, during a relaxed Sunday dinner, the conversation took an unexpected turn. The table was filled with the aroma of Evelyn's chicken pot pie, a recipe she had perfected over the years. They lingered long after their plates were empty, talking about work, the mountain weather, and the little irritations of adulthood. Then Grace set her fork down, studying Evelyn thoughtfully. "Mom," she asked gently, "if you could do anything at all, what would your dream be now?" Hannah looked up too, curiosity brightening her eyes. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. She laughed softly, waving the question away at first. "Oh, I don't know. I'm a little old for dreaming." "Try us," Hannah insisted, leaning in. "We want to know." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to revisit that tender part of her past. The dream she'd tucked away felt almost fragile to touch. "Well," she murmured, feeling a shy warmth rise to her cheeks. "I used to imagine having a small cafe, something cozy, somewhere people could come for comfort food and a warm place to sit. I always thought it would be nice to create something like that." Grace's eyes softened. Hannah's lips curved into a slow, growing smile. The sisters exchanged a look, one of quiet understanding, silent agreement, and a spark of something more. They didn't say anything aloud, not yet, but the air shifted slightly around them. Evelyn didn't notice. She was too busy staring into her mug, embarrassed by the admission. But Grace and Hannah saw it for what it was, a dream long deferred, a dream she'd sacrificed for them, a dream she still held close, even if she didn't believe she deserved to chase it. And right then, the seed of an idea took root, gentle, determined, and full of love. Once the idea took hold, Grace and Hannah couldn't let it go. It lived quietly between them at first, shared glances, half smiles, unspoken excitement. But within a week, those sparks grew into long conversations over coffee, lists scribbled in notebooks, and late-night planning sessions after work. They agreed on one thing immediately. Evelyn couldn't know. Not until the dream was ready to be placed gently into her hands. They started by organizing their finances. Grace approached the task with the same precision she brought to her accounting firm. She created spreadsheets, projected costs, compared loan options, and calculated what they could realistically manage on their combined savings. She spent nights after work reviewing leases, permits, and all the legal paperwork required to open a small business in North Carolina. She double-checked every detail twice, sometimes 3 times, determined to build something solid enough to last. Hannah's realm was entirely different, creative, instinctive, and deeply personal. She envisioned a cafe that reflected Evelyn's quiet warmth. Soft amber lighting, rustic wood tables, shelves lined with handmade pottery, cozy nooks near the windows. She sketched color palettes inspired by the Blue Ridge Mountains. Warm clay, soft greens, muted blues. She imagined an open kitchen where the scent of fresh pies and soups would drift into the seating area, wrapping every customer in the same comfort Evelyn had given them their entire lives. Together, the sisters poured themselves into the project. Their schedules became a delicate balancing act, full workdays followed by secret planning at Grace's apartment or in the back corner of Hannah's design studio. Weekends were filled with scouting locations, reviewing catalogs, debating tile choices, and researching equipment. Then, one breezy Saturday morning, they found it. Just a few blocks from Evelyn's home stood a vacant building, a small brick storefront with tall windows, a weathered wooden door, and a charm that seemed to whisper possibility. The inside was dusty and outdated, but the bones were there. Good natural light, a cozy layout, and a structure sound enough for renovation. "This is it," Hannah breathed, turning in a slow circle inside the empty room. Grace nodded, her mind already calculating costs and timelines. "Mom would love this." They signed the lease within a week. Renovation began the following weekend, quietly, carefully, and always in secret. Hannah took charge of the transformation. She designed custom shelving, chose tile that reminded her of mountain river stones, and painted the walls in a warm, inviting palette. She even created a mural on the back wall, an abstract interpretation of the Blue Ridge landscape Evelyn loved. During the evenings, after most contractors had left, Hannah stayed behind to sand, varnish, or paint, music playing softly in the background as she worked. Grace handled what most people never saw: the contracts, the health department approvals, the business registration, the vendor accounts. She ordered appliances, compared suppliers, negotiated with builders, coordinated deliveries, and balanced budgets with meticulous care. When something went wrong, a delayed shipment, a plumbing issue, she handled it calmly, refusing to let any setback derail their momentum. They worked tirelessly, often collapsing into bed near midnight, only to repeat the process the next day. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, but each time they felt themselves falter, they remembered Evelyn's long-forgotten dream. The memory of her embarrassed smile when she described the cafe fueled them forward. Slowly, the dusty old space transformed into something beautiful. The open kitchen gleamed with new stainless steel equipment. The wooden tables glowed warmly under pendant lights. The mural brought life to the room, and the scent of fresh paint mixed with the promise of everything this place would become. After several weeks, longer than they expected but more rewarding than they imagined, the cafe stood ready. All that remained was the final step, bringing Evelyn through the door and watching her world open back up. The day of the reveal arrived wrapped in a mix of nerves and excitement that neither Grace nor Hannah could fully hide. They had spent the entire week preparing, final checks on the lighting, a test run of the kitchen equipment, arranging flowers on every table, and coordinating with friends and neighbors who eagerly agreed to be part of the surprise. All that remained was bringing Evelyn there without raising suspicion. They told her they had planned a special dinner, something to thank her for everything she'd done. Evelyn protested at first, insisting they didn't need to make a fuss, but the girls brushed her concerns aside with practiced ease. "Just let us spoil you for one evening," Grace said with a smile that carried far more meaning than Evelyn realized. As evening settled over Asheville, the sisters drove her toward the quiet row of small businesses just a few blocks from home. Evelyn didn't notice anything unusual at first. She was too busy admiring the warm glow of streetlights flickering on, casting gold across the sidewalks. When Grace parked in front of the newly renovated brick building, Evelyn frowned slightly. "Girls, are you sure this is the right place? It looks closed." "Come on," Hannah said, slipping her arm into Evelyn's. "We promise it'll make sense." The building looked transformed, even from the outside. Clean brick, freshly painted trim, soft lights glowing behind the tall front windows. Evelyn felt a flutter of confusion as they walked toward the door. She noticed a small crowd inside, shadows of people moving, shapes she thought she recognized. Why are there people in there? she asked softly. Her voice tinged with bewilderment. Grace exchanged a quick look with Hannah. Then she opened the door. Warm light spilled out, wrapping around them. Evelyn stepped inside slowly, her breath catching as the scent of fresh pastries and simmering soup enveloped her. Conversations hushed, and dozens of familiar faces, friends, neighbors, past co-workers, turned toward her with warm smiles. The space itself was beautiful. Wooden tables gleamed under amber lights. Every detail felt intentional. The mountain-inspired color palette, the handcrafted shelves, the cozy seating arranged near the windows. The room radiated comfort in a way that tugged at something deep within her. But it was the sign behind the counter that made her freeze. Painted in elegant lettering across a rustic wooden board were the words, Evelyn's Hearth Cafe. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her knees weakened. She turned slowly to her daughters, utterly speechless. "Mom," Grace began gently, stepping closer, "this is for you." Evelyn shook her head in disbelief, tears already pooling at the corners of her eyes. I don't understand." Hannah took her other hand. "We know you gave up so much for us. Your time, your energy, your dreams. You spent years putting everything aside so we could grow up safe and loved." Grace continued, her voice soft but steady. "You once told us you dreamed of opening a cafe. You said it like it didn't matter anymore, but Mom, it mattered to us." Hannah's voice broke slightly. "You deserved to have that dream. So we decided to make it real." Emotion overwhelmed Evelyn. Tears spilled freely as she looked from the sign to the walls to the mural on the back, Hannah's Blue Ridge-inspired creation, and then finally back to her daughters. "You did all this," she whispered, trembling. "For you," Hannah said, "because you've always been our home. And now we want you to have a home for your passion, too." Evelyn reached out, pulling both girls into her arms. She wept openly, her shoulders shaking as decades of sacrifice, gratitude, and love converged into one breathtaking moment. The room filled with applause, but Evelyn barely heard it. All she felt were the arms around her, the warmth of the cafe, and the undeniable truth settling deep in her chest. This was the greatest surprise of her life, a dream she thought she'd lost. A love returned to her tenfold. From the very first week, it was clear that Evelyn's Hearth Cafe was something special, something the neighborhood had been waiting for without knowing it. Word traveled quickly through Asheville about the cozy new spot on the corner with the warm lighting, comforting aromas, and a chef who greeted customers like old friends. Locals wandered in out of curiosity and returned again and again because the place felt like home. The cafe became known for Evelyn's signature dishes, her chicken pot pie, her biscuits with honey butter, her seasonal berry cobbler, recipes she had perfected over years of feeding Grace and Hannah through hardship and healing. Customers praised the food, but what kept them coming back was the atmosphere, welcoming, gentle, familiar. People said the cafe felt like stepping into a memory they didn't know they had. Evelyn thrived in the space in ways even she didn't expect. She laughed freely, something she hadn't done often in the years after Thomas's death. She moved around the kitchen with a natural ease, greeting customers by name, sliding plates onto tables with a smile, and listening to people's stories as if each one were a gift. Her cheeks glowed pink from the heat of the ovens and the joy of doing something she had always dreamed of. Grace and Hannah anchored the cafe behind the scenes, forming the perfect team. Grace handled the business side, balancing accounts, managing payroll, negotiating with suppliers. She kept the operations running smoothly and efficiently, ensuring the cafe never stumbled financially. Her quiet competence became the backbone of the entire enterprise. Hannah, meanwhile, oversaw the aesthetics and the flow of the space. She trained staff, kept the interior feeling fresh, and curated small touches that made customers feel cared for. Seasonal decor, local art on the walls, fresh flowers on the tables. The Blue Ridge mural she'd painted on the cafe's back wall became a beloved symbol of the shop's spirit. Together, the three of them built something vibrant and meaningful. As years passed, the cafe didn't just succeed, it blossomed. Lines stretched out the door on weekend mornings. Local magazines wrote features about the cafe's home-style cooking. Travelers visiting Asheville added it to their must-visit lists. Regular customers brought their friends, then their families, and eventually their children, turning Evelyn's Hearth into a generational staple of the neighborhood. Eventually, the demand grew too large for the little brick building to contain. The sisters approached Evelyn again, this time not with a surprise, but with a proposal. "It might be time for a second location," Grace suggested gently one evening as they closed up shop. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted in wonder. "You think so?" "We know so," Hannah said, smiling. "We've outgrown this space, and people keep asking when we're expanding." The idea felt surreal but exciting. Within months, they secured a new spot on the west side of town, a space slightly larger but designed with the same warmth and heart as the original. Hannah oversaw the interior design again. Grace handled the contracts. Evelyn contributed recipes and helped train the new kitchen staff. The second location opened to overwhelming support, solidifying the cafe's legacy as a beloved Asheville institution. But time kept moving, and even dreams once realized eventually shift to make room for something new. As the cafe flourished, Evelyn began stepping back from the daily grind, not because she lacked passion, but because she finally felt she could rest. She let the girls take the lead, knowing the dream was safe in their hands. She still visited often, greeting customers and supervising special dishes, but the responsibility no longer weighed on her shoulders the way it once did. She had built a life from the ashes of betrayal and loss, a life filled with purpose, community, and above all, love. Watching Grace and Hannah confidently manage the business, guiding employees and shaping the cafe's future, Evelyn felt a pride so profound it often brought tears to her eyes. These were her daughters, her family, her legacy, and the life they built together was more beautiful than anything she had ever dared to imagine. Evelyn often found herself sitting at the same small corner table near the front windows of the cafe, the table she claimed soon after the place opened. It gave her the perfect view of everything that mattered: the kitchen pass where dishes left with steam curling upward, the dining room filled with laughter and clinking silverware, and most importantly, the sight of Grace and Hannah moving through the space with a confidence and grace that made her heart swell. They ran the cafe now with the same love she once poured into raising them. Grace handled the business with steady competence, greeting vendors, reviewing accounts, and making sure every detail stayed afloat. Hannah floated through the dining room, adjusting centerpieces, chatting with regular customers, offering design tweaks to staff, and ensuring the atmosphere always felt warm and welcoming. Watching them together was like watching a dance, well-practiced, effortless, harmonious, and every time Evelyn witnessed it, something inside her softened. She had come so far from the woman who once collapsed on her kitchen floor after the phone call that shattered her life. The betrayal, the grief, the confusion, they had once felt unbearable. She had believed her world ended that day. But somewhere along the years of sleepless nights, scraped-together paychecks, growing children, and small shared moments, her life had rebuilt itself quietly, steadily, beautifully. Motherhood hadn't been part of her plan. Raising someone else's daughters had been the furthest thing from her imagination, and yet it had become the center of everything. She remembered those early days, the two frightened little girls holding hands at a funeral they didn't understand, the hesitant smiles, the cautious trust, the nights she cried silently after they'd gone to bed, wondering if she was enough. She remembered choosing them, not because she had to, but because leaving them alone in the world was something she couldn't bear. She remembered watching them grow, Grace with her organized mind and careful questions, Hannah with her quiet creativity and tender heart. She remembered the first time one of them called her Mom, a word that had cracked something open in her chest. She remembered every sacrifice along the way, every small victory, every moment she realized she wasn't just raising children, she was building a family. The cafe had been her dream once, a distant, almost fragile wish she never believed she'd touch. But sitting there now, watching customers savor her recipes, listening to laughter rise toward the ceiling, feeling the warmth that filled the room, she understood something she hadn't before. The cafe wasn't her real dream. This family was. This life, messy and unexpected and hard-earned, had been the miracle she never knew she needed. Evelyn smiled as she watched a young couple share a slice of her berry cobbler, the same recipe her daughters insisted become a menu staple. She heard Grace laugh from behind the counter. She saw Hannah kneel beside an elderly regular, adjusting her walker so she could sit comfortably. Her daughters had repaid her sacrifices, not in money or gifts, but in the people they had become, capable, loving, compassionate. They had taken her broken world and filled it with warmth. Evelyn wrapped her hands around her mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. Quiet gratitude settled in her chest, a deep, steady peace. This life had begun in heartbreak, but it had grown into something whole, something gentle, something worth every step of the journey. And as she sat in her favorite corner, watching love ripple through the cafe she never thought she'd have, Evelyn knew she had come full circle. Her heart was full.